Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about dead stop training for Gainzzz, and that's with 3Z. So let me put on my +5 out of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. You guys can see I've more or less gone back over to mostly this as of yesterday, because I was doing normal squats. Now I've gone back to pause squats, but I've always kind of promoted pause squats. Now when I talk about dead stop training in Gainzzz, what I mean is that it incorporates multiple elements on your big exercises when you are able to do them from a dead stop. And I legitimately believe that if you're really looking for ideal exercises to stimulate muscle growth, adaptation, everything else, what you're trying to do, get a training effect, I think you either need to be doing dead stop exercises or you need to be doing something that gets a stretch reflex. I don't think anything else is really ideal unless you've got a very, very specific reason, sport-specific reason for doing something else. I tend to be of the opinion that this is where your exercises need to be in one of those two categories. And I do think that most lifts need to be dead stop. So what do I mean by dead stop? And why does it matter? Anything you pull off the floor, a deadlift, and if you're bouncing the weight off the floor on a deadlift, it's no longer from a dead stop, is it? So you got to reset every rep. How about rowing from the floor? Pendlay rows, but actually that's the traditional barbell row. Pause bench, where you actually pause with the bar on your chest. You don't bounce it, you don't touch and go. Floor press. How about a press, just the press, a standing press if you pause it on your chest before you press. Pull-ups. Chin-ups from a dead hang where you stop at the bottom on each rep for at least one count to get that stretch and then explode. And there's a lot of other examples, but essentially anything where you pull from the floor, even a pause squat where you pause at the bottom, but most definitely exercises off the floor, which would include all your Olympic lifts and everything else, any sort of clean snatch, rowing, deadlifting off the floor. The reason this matters is multifold in nature. A lot of it has to do with recruiting maximum amount of muscle fibers. In other words, it is difficult to move a weight from a dead stop. It requires, particularly with a heavy weight, it means you have to generate a lot of force very, very quickly to get a weight moving and keep it moving. In other words, I'm not talking about when people are talking about slow training, I'm talking about a dead stop and then exploding. So you come down on your chest on the bench and explode. Touch the chest, explode. Same thing with a pause squat. You come to the bottom and then you explode as fast as you can. There's an extra explosive element involved with any exercise in which you come to a dead stop when you are training. All right, there's an extra explosive element, and because if it's a lift that you have to get it accelerating quickly, you get much higher rates of muscle fiber recruitment in the first inch or so of the exercise because you have to get it moving, as opposed to something you're just kind of cheating and bouncing and touching and going, yeah, you can lift more weight, but what you need to look at is just because you're lifting more weight, are you necessarily recruiting more muscle fibers? Now we know accelerating a bar more quickly with any given weight or any dumbbell, doesn't matter, accelerating it as quickly as you can absolutely does recruit more muscle fibers, but that also counts when we're talking about from a dead stop. That can enhance that even more. Yeah, if you touch and go a lift and go explosive instead of fast, we know based upon all the data that's out there over the years that that does recruit more muscle fibers. Right? Trying to lift a weight slowly is counterproductive. It's counterproductive again unless you've got a sport-specific reason for doing so. So it's one of the silliest things that came out of bodybuilding that's just been torn apart over the years in physiology and sports science and everything. And ultimately goes to show you just how effective drugs can be. Because guys still get massive doing that silly stuff while using tons of drugs. It's because the drugs are letting them use really stupid training methods and still get jacked. Just in case people don't understand what's happening there. So, but the ability to go to a dead stop, it has a lot to do with muscle fiber recruitment. It can do a lot for you there. And so again, it comes down to recruiting as many muscle fibers as possible on every rep, on every set, no matter what weight you happen to be using. And in many exercises, depending upon your genetics and the exercise and everything else, you may have to reduce the weight substantially in order to come to a pause or a dead stop. But it pays off in terms of, again, muscle fiber recruitment, because there's no ego lifting involved. There's ego lifting goes out the window when you've got to move a weight from a dead stop or from a pause. right? It removes a lot of the ego component, and you are forced to just use your raw strength and power to get it moving. Then we come down to that point of tightness, technique, control. What happens when you do that, a lot of these force you to learn to get tight so that you can explode a heavy weight out of the bottom on any of these exercises, whether it's a deadlift, a squat, a bench press, a row, pull up, anything. Exploding it from a dead stop forces you to learn to get tighter and to ratchet your body up tight. What does that mean in terms of muscle fiber recruitment through the whole body? Well, if you're having to be tighter to stabilize all this stuff better and to get yourself into the position to actually explode all these lifts without any momentum helping you, what happens? You get more muscles involved. Other muscles have to take a greater degree of involvement in order to maintain that. So the end result is more overall hypertrophy through your whole body. And that's what people need to remember. When you're talking about making real gains, you're talking about getting really big, we're no longer talking about, hey, how can I isolate this one muscle? It's how can I make everything in my body grow? How can I get everything to grow? And that will carry over better to sports and athleticism as well, because if your body is trained to work as one unit, to use compensatory strength for everything, to learn to use other muscles to get everything involved, that is going to make you better in any sort of athletic endeavor, any sort of struggle, any sort of life and death scenario, things you would think of happening outside of the weight room. You are going to get better carryover because you're training your body to learn to use itself as one unit. And again, you're going to get a lot more strength from a dead stop on all these things, and that's helpful in a lot of things. Again, it can help you maximize your power potential. Because again, we can't really always train power to a large extent because it's largely genetic, but what we can do is train with different things in such a way to maximize what we already have and to learn to utilize it better. So it's useful for that, but the thing you've got to look at is that it gets more muscles involved. Learning to stay tight and to have control, and all these pause lifts get more muscles involved. It can help with overall hypertrophy, and your injury rates can go lower because you're now forced to use weights that you can handle. Because if you can't accelerate a weight from a dead stop, if it's too heavy for you to do that, that means you don't have control of that weight. So a lot of pause work and dead stop training gives you mastery over the weight you're using, allows all this extra muscle fiber recruitment from the primary movers, gets all these other secondary muscles involved better, but also it starts to reduce your chances of injury because it limits what you can lift to what you are actually capable of lifting. It forces you to learn to get tighter and to brace your body better, which again removes a lot of the concerns we have as far as injuries from looseness and bad angles and everything. It can remove a lot of that or greatly reduce it. So it actually reduces your chances of injury in addition to giving fantastic training stimulus. So it's a win-win. It's just a lot of pause work and dead stop work can be bad on your ego because you can't always lift as much weight. You can't cheat as much. But you can still lift explosively. And I think people need to understand this. When we talk about technique and control and explosiveness, we are not talking about the slow controlled bodybuilders we're talking about. We're talking about having mastery and control over the weight. But you do have control, and that's the main thing. It gives you a better sense of control, better body awareness. Then we come down to the point of mobility. People always talk about, you need this mobility work, that mobility work. You ever tried pause squats? Because what is mobility? Mobility and flexibility get confused. Flexibility is the ability to move a joint through a given range of motion, right? That's flexibility. Mobility is your strength at the ends of your range of motion. It's your strength at the ends of your range of motion. In other words, a flexible person who doesn't have mobility can maybe bend a joint to a certain point, but they're very weak at that extreme end. They're weak when that joint is extended out a certain way or it's pulled into a certain angle. They're very weak because they're not strong at that joint angle. Pause work teaches you to get strong. It forces you to get strong at your more extreme and terminal joint angles on some exercises. Take the squat, for example. If you have to drop it to the bottom and pause squat and you can't use the stretch reflex to get you started at the bottom, what do you have to have? mobility. It creates mobility in your hips, knees, everything else. It creates mobility for you so that when you are at those disadvantaged joint angles, you can maximize muscle fiber recruitment. And if you can do that, that is mobility. How about dead hang pull-ups and chin-ups? Right? You're creating strength at the terminal ends at a stretch and having to hold it for a second and then explode. That builds mobility. Essentially, if you're doing a lot of dead stop work like this, for many of your exercises, it will actually help build your mobility. It can be a big part of it. In many cases, depending upon the person, can be your exclusive mobility training. All right, and all these people spend all this time talking about we need to do mobility work and everything else for fitness and health, but a lot of your resistance training, if done correctly, can handle the lion's share of that role. It can be extremely beneficial towards that end, thus removing needing to do a lot of extra mobility work once you get a little further into the training. So it has those benefits to go with it as well. So it's not just about your gains, it's not just about all of that. It comes down to injury prevention, mobility, athleticism, everything else. So dead stop training is something I believe is generally a superior way to train, something I do promote you do with most of your exercises. You don't have to do it with all of them, but if the majority of them are dead stop, I think there's a lot of benefits to be gleaned from it. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.